In all of nature's scripted dramas of survival and destruction, beetles armed with hardened mandibles and formidable antennae seem forever destined to be the outcasts of the forest, their entire lives defined by relentless gnawing and endless extractions from the trees. Yet, as the final afterglow of the Himalayas was swallowed by a fierce blizzard, and the vast expanses of ancient cedar forests exhaled a deep, unyielding, and profoundly zen-like woody aroma into the dark, a single giant longhorn beetle made the most anomalous choice. Rather than boring desperately into the deep heart of the trunks to escape the freezing winter like his peers, he chose to remain in absolute stillness upon the outermost bark of a millennium-old cedar, the very branch that stood tallest and faced the tempest head-on, allowing the frost to slowly blanket his pitch-black, armor-like carapace. Tonight, by the gentle, dancing glow of the hearth, let us immerse ourselves in this tale that requires no effort to remember, and wander together into the true chronicle of his life. This giant longhorn beetle was known to the alpine winds as Gore. He was once the most colossal and astonishingly destructive force in the entire subalpine conifer forest, his existence originally nothing less than a ceaseless campaign of conquest and defiance. Yet at this very moment, he merely perches in absolute stillness upon the weathered limb of a massive cedar of Lebanon. He no longer gnaws, no longer beats his wings, and no longer resists the encroaching, irreversible rigidity brought by the bitter cold. His life did not end as predicted, perishing amidst the mediocrity of the lowlands or the petty squabbles of his kind. Instead, with an exquisitely solitary yet profoundly dignified posture, cradled by a canopy of stars and a serene, meditative woody note, he softly drifted into an eternal sleep. This is by no means a tragic freezing filled with regret, but rather a grand curtain call he had long contemplated and willingly embraced, a midnight parable of releasing attachments, discovering true sanctuary, and returning to the embrace of the earth. The fractures of destiny often manifest within the most imperceptible moments of the mundane. For Gore, it occurred on an otherwise ordinary twilight on the fringes of the dark forest. In those days, Gore possessed the darkest, heaviest, and most impenetrable shell in the entire alpine woods. His elongated antennae could effortlessly decode the faintest shifts in wind direction, and he had never met his match in the long wars for territory. The law of the longhorn beetle realm was cold and utilitarian. From the very moment they emerged from their pupae, every individual was driven by primal instinct to seek the most succulent trunks, tearing through bark with powerful mandibles to feast on sap, validating their raw strength and invincibility. Gore had once devoutly revered this hierarchy of raw power, believing that the entire purpose of existence was carved into the honeycombed, ruined growth rings of the pines and spruces he had plundered, until the day he soared blindly toward an unexplored cliff at a higher altitude, searching for a purer essence of life. At the threshold of that precipice bordering the sky, there were none of the claustrophobic, fiercely competitive broadleaf thickets of the lowlands, but only giant, ancient Himalayan cedars that had weathered thousands of winters. The limbs of those cedars bore a muted gray-brown hue sculpted by the hands of time, their needle-like foliage resembling clusters of rigid steel pins, generating a low, majestic rustle in the biting mountain gale. As Gore habitually descended upon the trunk of the most venerable cedar, opening his mandibles to savagely crush the bark as he had always done, an unexpected sensation froze his movements in mid-motion. This was not the viscous, sickly sweet taste of lowland trees, but an exceptionally cool, profound aroma infused with the primal breath of the ancient earth and glaciers, the distinctive, bitter woody note of a millennium-old cedar. This fragrance swept through the cold wind, penetrating Gore's senses completely unhindered. At that moment, he seemed to hear the echoes of 1,000 winters stored within the ancient timber, a grand, forgiving, and incomprehensibly serene force. Gore's long antennae faltered in a curious, hesitant tremor. A novel sensation of deep weariness bloomed from the joints of his limbs. It was not physical exhaustion, but rather the audible fracturing of a lifelong, deep-seated hubris. For the first time, he forgot to gnaw. He simply huddled motionless within the fissures of the rugged bark, watching the sea of clouds rolling beneath him and the sun sinking below the horizon. At that moment, the jarring noise of his daytime conquests tore a crack in his heart that could never be mended. The days following his return from the cliff shifted into something uncomfortably different. The airtight, suffocating courtships and battles within the lowland forests began to weigh on Gore as a sense of inescapable vacuum and heavy exhaustion. Every morning, as tens of thousands of insects shrieked and swarmed frantically within the sultry brushwood, shattering their carapaces merely to secure a sweet tree hollow. The collective roar sounded to Gore like nothing but raw anxiety and panic. Flying along the outermost fringes of the swarms, Gore looked coldly upon his zealous comrades who only knew how to mechanically replicate the same predatory patterns. Suddenly, an immense wave of desolation washed over him. While his physical form continued to project a fearsome and colossal presence, his soul remained anchored to that snow-dusted cedar grove, floating upon that high-altitude wind infused with the calm woody scent. The web of power was woven densely throughout the lowland woods. Formidable beetles monopolized the most bountiful bark, while the elderly and weak were ruthlessly cast out to the freezing peripheries, left to be consumed by parasites. Gore began to deliberately suppress his destructive instincts. He stopped participating in those zealous territorial partitions, choosing instead to fly alone against the headwind toward that cloud-piercing cliff as twilight fell. During these long, silent journeys, he began to notice the subtle angles of starlight reflecting off his pitch-black shell. He began to comprehend the delicate cadence of the wind combing through pine needles. These were the very noises he had rigidly ignored in his past pursuit of sheer efficiency. He established an unspoken understanding with that ancient cedar standing at the absolute vanguard of the cliff. Having braved countless lightning strikes and hailstorms, its bark was withered and split, yet it projected a timeless, rock-like quality. Whenever Gore landed weary upon its boughs, the old cedar simply allowed this former destroyer to cling tightly to its side, utilizing its cool, soothing, and deeply protective woody aroma to tenderly envelop his dust-laden body. In these brief interludes of stillness, Gore had no need to chart out the convoluted territories of the valleys, nor did he care whether his dominance was ebbing away. Cradled within the embrace of this ancient tree, he simply rediscovered the calm frequency of his own soul. Winter in the Himalayas always arrives without warning. A freezing northern gale swept away the remaining warmth of summer and autumn overnight, plunging the entire mountain into a solemn, blinding shroud of white. The longhorn beetle population in the valley succumbed to utter panic. They gnawed frantically through the bark, trying to bore into the deepest heartwood to escape the bitter cold, a final, manic struggle born of pure despair. But Gore did not join them. His antennae began to grow numb under the plummeting temperatures, and a thin layer of hoarfrost materialized across his dark armor. Every breath he drew felt heavy and labored. On an evening thick with a roaring blizzard, the sky darkened like a colossal shroud, the tempest screaming across the ridges, mercilessly freezing countless fragile lives in mid-air. Summoning the absolute last of his remaining strength, Gore chose not to tunnel into the warm core of the wood. Instead, he climbed unsteadily toward the highest branch of that ancient cedar, facing the northern gale head-on. The blizzard battered his tattered wings and armor like countless flying blades, snapping with a dense crackling noise. His solitary frame appeared infinitesimally small against the monolithic force of nature. Yet the ancient cedar beneath him stood like an immovable, majestic mountain. No matter how ruthlessly the storm raged, its rugged limbs remained steadfast in the void, exhaling a reassuring scent of dry wood. Amidst the cascading snow, the cedar gently inclined its heavily laden boughs, utilizing its interlocking layers of green needles to weave a miniature, wind-breaking sanctuary for this weary pilgrim. Within this micro-world completely insulated by ice and timber scent, Gore listened to the apocalyptic howling outside, yet his soul experienced a sublime, unprecedented tranquility he had never known since birth. He was no longer a resented pest, nor a warrior bound to remain eternally defensive against predators. He was merely an organic extension of this vast, warm, and ancient living entity, vibrating in perfect harmony with the wind. The storm ceased gradually into the dead of night. Cleansed of its winter clouds, the alpine sky loomed exceptionally high and crystal clear, the magnificent Milky Way resembling a river of crushed diamonds, gazing silently down upon the earth. Gore lay within a bed of rigid, dry cedar needles. The foliage exhaled a profoundly rich aroma of essential pine oil, that scent of earth and resin smoothing away the deep-seated anxieties of his soul, touch by touch. He tested his elongated antennae and found that the battle scars earned from his long wars had lost all sensation under the extreme cold. That profound relaxation blooming from every individual cell made him yearn to fall into a lasting sleep. Had this occurred in his past life within the lowland thickets, such absolute surrender would signify the collapse of all defenses, an invitation to be claimed by nocturnal predators, a declaration of the end. But here, cradled within the embrace of the millennium-old cedar that symbolized eternity and stillness, atop this alpine crest washed clean by the snow, all dangers and anxieties dissolved into nothingness. He no longer needed to blindly collide just to validate his raw strength, nor did he have to deplete his essence for the propagation of his colony. The shackles imposed by his era and instincts were entirely undone within this cool, cleansing fragrance. The ancient cedar generated an exceptionally low, slow rustle in the midnight breeze, not a boastful display of overcoming the storm, but an ancient, gentle lullaby cradling every exhausted soul. Gore closed his compound eyes completely. The cosmos began to shrink infinitely within his perception, narrowing until it consisted only of the rugged texture of the bark beneath him and that zen-like cedar note capable of smoothing away all mental clutter. His heartbeat slowed in tandem with the deepening night, yet his interior was flooded with an unprecedented sense of absolute security, the sublime peace of a soul that had finally discovered its true home. As the first pristine glint of dawn pierced through the morning mist, scattering flakes of spun gold across this ancient, peaceful cedar forest of the Himalayas, a new day arrived precisely on schedule, the world spinning on in absolute sanctity. Upon the tallest branch of that ancient cedar flanking the cliff, Gore remained in perfect stillness, his pitch-black armor completely integrated and blending with the gray-brown architecture of the bark. As a few gentle breezes swept past, the heavy snow layers upon the boughs slid down softly, like a pure white, flawless winter quilt, meticulously blanketing the longhorn beetle's miniature, beautifully loose form. He did not perish in the decaying, combative rubble heaps of the lowlands, he surrendered himself, unreservedly, to this majestic mountain that cradles countless myths and accommodates infinite births. The enigma of why he chose to remain alone on the branch amidst the raging blizzard would never be understood by his peers in the valley, they would merely employ the cold logic of natural selection to footnote his departure. Yet to this vast prairie, and to that specific aroma of cedar that had kept him company through the dead of night, Gore had left behind a secretive, epic ballad of surrender, of trust, and of returning to absolute quietude. Through his ultimate choice, he proved to a clamorous world that the true strength in life is sometimes not how many territories you conquer with a hardened exterior, but having the courage, at the perfect moment, to permit oneself to stop and dissolve into silence. The breeze swept through once more, and the bare branches of the cedar woods exhaled their final, most introverted fragrance under the morning sun, carrying away all residual anxiety and weariness, leaving only an eternal silence tailored for the slumber of all restless souls. Now, this tale of the duel between armor and stillness has reached its destination, and that fragrance of cedar, laden with the temperature of the alpine storm, seems to be drifting softly into your room, gently cradling your thoughts that have been wound tight all day. The world outside has surrendered to an absolute hush. Relinquish all attachments, all defenses, and all heavy burdens. Like the giant longhorn beetle who found his destination within the ancient tree, let yourself drift into a peaceful, deep, and heavy sleep.